Hi there, it's Llarold. And upon finishing up the beta previews for all the tanks in BFA, I didn't really know what to do next. Fortunately, Blizzard stepped in with a really awesome redesign to my favorite DPS spec in the game, Fury Warrior. While I usually only cover tanks when it comes to videos and guide making, I do play a lot of Fury Warrior, Windwalker Monk, and Frost DK. There's two reasons for that. First, they kill stuff faster than tanks, so that makes world questing go pretty quickly, and second, I pug stuff in WoW from time to time. I like to think that being able to tank and DPS on a character is probably better for finding groups than only being able to tank. Also, they're all just pretty fun DPS specs. Anyhow, let's dive in. Up until this point, Fury on the beta had played, like most of the tanks, a lot like live. Just like everyone else, it lost its legendaries and its artifact weapon, but all that really changed for the spec was that you generated a lot less rage, and your cooldowns were longer. Overall, it felt the same, but slow, like Legion Fury covered in maple syrup. This combined with one of the worst underlying design flaws of Fury Warrior, which is how their rage generation and enrage uptime scaled with gear. This set of changes doesn't really alter anything in terms of the abilities you'll use. They all have the same names and work in very familiar ways, but it really gets rid of that horrible feeling of being slow and underpowered when you're undergeared. And that's the real success of this redesign. Now let's go through the ability redesigns one by one. Bloodthirst crits no longer grant Enrage. Instead, Bloodthirst has a 30% chance to trigger Enrage. That's it. Enrage is also now a 25% haste increase and a 10% movement speed increase. Both of those numbers are subject to change, of course, but it's important to note that this makes Enrage a meaningful buff that affects your ability usage rates and your global cooldown time, instead of only being an attack speed increase like it has been in Legion. This is good. Enrage no longer increases your damage taken either, and while Fury Warriors no longer get a bonus 15% health to compensate for that, this is still a net positive. Fury got unfairly picked on by mechanics that deal percent health damage, such as bursting in Mythic Plus. Now they just get the extra stats that come from wearing two two-handed weapons, which is still pretty nice. Raging Blow has been redesigned as well. It generates 12 rage per cast, which is a nice buff, and it no longer requires you to be enraged in order to cast it. It also has 2 charges on a medium length cooldown, so it works a little bit like it does on live if you're talented and are in a rage, but a little differently as well. It also has a 25% chance to reset its own cooldown when you use it, which is really unfamiliar territory for Fury Warriors, but it's not bad. This change does mean that there really isn't a big difference in feel between when you're enraged and not enraged. Again, just like when you have inner rage talented on live. This is a good thing, because it makes you no longer feel like you're just spamming Bloodthirst hoping for Enrage procs and then smashing a filler whenever it doesn't. That, combined with the Raging Blow self-resets, really make the rotation feel dynamic and reactive, and not so monotonous when Enrage doesn't proc. Furious Slash, instead of being a weak filler spell that only serves to buff your next Bloodthirst crit chance, is now a weak filler spell that generates a little rage and has a 10% chance to enrage you. Now, betas are always subject to change, and Blizzard has explicitly stated that they're in the process of replacing Furious Slash with a new, revamped Whirlwind, effectively making Fury's single-target filler spell an AoE filler spell instead. I welcome that change. Right now, Whirlwind is the same on beta as it is on live. Blizzard's upcoming plan is that the new Whirlwind will grant rage based on the number of targets you hit, up to a cap of 8 rage per cast. It will also cause your next 2 single-target spells to cleave nearby enemies, so instead of only applying to Bloodthirst and Rampage, you'll be able to cleave Execute and Raging Blow as well. Applying to the next 2 abilities instead of just one is a nice quality of life buff. Here's a situation that happens to me pretty often when AoEing as a Fury Warrior on live. I'll be over 95 rage and Bloodthirst will still be on cooldown for a second or two. So I hit Whirlwind hoping that auto attacks push me to 100 rage, so that I can hit Rampage and cleave everything around me with it. But then the auto attacks miss, so I have to hit Bloodthirst, then Whirlwind again to cleave everything with Rampage. It's annoying, and I'm glad that Blizzard's decided that that's something they should fix. I agree, it is something they should fix. Thank you! Execute's completely redesigned for Fury Warriors. It now generates 20 rage per cast and has a 6-second cooldown that's reduced by haste, just like all the other rotational abilities on cooldowns. This is a crazy redesign that will completely alter the way Fury handles its execute phase. Instead of a desperate mad dash to generate rage and just mash on execute as much as possible, it becomes about weaving executes in as a high damage rage generator, and using that extra damage and rage to boost your normal rotation built around generating rage and spinning it with Rampage. On the subject of Rampage, it's unchanged. Rage generation is greatly increased and you'll be able to cast it more often, but it's still just the same good old DPS button it's been throughout Legion. The last baseline Fury Warrior ability that's gotten a redesign is Battle Cry, which has been renamed to Recklessness. Instead of being worth 100% crit chance for 6 seconds, it now increases rage generation by 100% for 10 seconds, and also grants 20% crit chance. The duration increase helps offset the fact that it's now on the GCD. This redesign changes up the way that you play while doing burst damage. It's pretty nice, and it probably opens up itemization a little bit, although crit's probably still not going to be a great stat. Finally, Fury Warriors will once again have access to Victory Rush. This won't mean too much during single target boss fights, but it's a great quality of life improvement for leveling, soloing, dungeons, and ad fights. Pretty happy about that change. Alright, now that the base class stuff is covered, let's look at talents. Fury talents hadn't changed much up to this point, which I guess just means Blizzard had saved everything up for now. Now let's go through the tree and break it down. The first tier of talents has the exact same names and icons as on Live, but man are they different. War Machine is completely revamped from Live, and while it has a constant passive benefit and active rage generation on kills, it's really not worth a lot now. The move speed is okay, but Bear Tartar's better. Endless Rage grants 6 rage whenever you enrage. Rage, rage, rage. It's a good rage increase over time. That's about it. Fresh Meat is an increase to enrage uptime with a nice self-healing bonus as well. Both of these talents have some interactions further down in the tree, and what you choose down there will probably affect what you take up here in Tier 1. In any case, both talents are pretty competitive with each other, and kinda like two halves of the same whole. They're like Coke and Pepsi. Unlike Coke and Pepsi, these two talents would go really well together, with one causing you to enrage more often and the other giving you a benefit when you're enraging all the time. But they're on the same tier, so unless they get moved to different tiers from each other, that's probably not going to happen. The second tier doesn't have much in the way of changes. Double Time is still a great mobility increase, and Stormbolt's still a mediocre range stun. Shockwave is now gone for Fury, and with the return of Victory Rush, Impending Victory is now an option. A lousy option, but still an option. It works just like Victory Rush if you score kills, which just means that talenting into it in that situation doesn't do anything. But it does give you an incredibly small heal on a 30-second cooldown if you're not able to score killing blows, so that's something? It's not much, but it exists. Third tier, Reckless Abandon, has moved up from the bottom tier, and it's the same as it is in Legion. With the redesign to Recklessness, this is a bit of a weird talent. It's still good, but a rage generation increase that immediately starts you off with 100 rage, so you have to begin by spending rage, is just kinda weird. It's still probably the best option in the tier. Outburst and Avatar are back from before, and Outburst still isn't very good. Avatar's now on the GCD, but it generates 20 rage to try and help offset that a little bit. It's clumsy to use, but it's still a decent burst DPS cooldown. The fourth tier is fairly similar. Furious Charge and Bounding Stride each provide their same self-healing and mobility increases as in Legion, and Warpaint now makes Enrage grant you 10% damage reduction, which is a huge buff from where it was in Legion. Pretty nice. Tier 5's another case of the same icons and names on very different skills, for the most part. Carnage now decreases the cost of Rampage and increases its damage. This combos really nicely with Endless Rage up in the first tier. Frothing Berserker increases the cost of Rampage up to 95 Rage, and makes it grant a buff to damage and haste for 6 seconds. This will make Rampage create brief windows in which you'll really want to try and pump out as much damage as possible. You know, just like how Fury Warrior already plays with Enrage, but more. Massacre is the same as before. With Execute being on a medium short cooldown, there's just no way this talent's going to be able to compete unless it's completely changed. I would expect for that to happen. The next to last tier is still unfinished. With the changes to Raging Blow, Inner Rage has been turned off basically, and its tooltip now just reads NYI, not yet implemented. Frenzy's the same as before, but because of the change to Enrage now being a haste buff, it interacts positively with that. It also interacts nicely with the haste buff from Frothing Berserker. All of these buffs scale multiplicatively with your on-character haste and each other, which is really good. Blizzard stated that they intend for Frenzy to remain a talent when they make the upcoming changes to Whirlwind and remove Furious Slash. At this point, their plan is for it to be a separate keybind that works in single target. This could be a little bit unwieldy to use, but it shouldn't be too bad in single target, which is probably the only place you'd want to use it anyways. Bloodbath has been redesigned from Live. It's now on a 40-second cooldown, which is still kind of awkward and doesn't really sync up with any other offensive cooldowns. It now also deals a sizable chunk of damage to enemies in an arc in front of you when you cast it, then grants you its same 40% extra damage bleed buff for the next 10 seconds. It is on the GCD, but overall it's a buff or at least a lateral move from Legion rather than just a pure nerf, and it can replace Odin's Fury on your bars pretty comfortably. Bloodbath is probably the best talent for AoE, and either Frenzy or the revamped Inner Rage for single target. We'll have to see what those talents look like after the revamp's totally finished. And here we have the last tier. Wrecking Ball has jumped down in place of Reckless Abandon, and it's been slightly buffed from Live. It's definitely the best talent in the tier so far, but with the plan changes to Furious Slash and Whirlwind, I wouldn't be surprised if this gets nerfed or just removed completely. Dragon Roar is an AoE damage skill with a slow now. No damage buff or any other special interactions, it's on a medium cooldown, but it's really not worth very much damage, generates no rage, and can't trigger Enrage. It's not very good! Bleedstorm is still here as well, but as has been the case in Legion, you can't stay enraged for the whole thing. That really hurts its value, and for a spec built around spending every single global with zero downtime whatsoever, Bleedstorm just isn't a consistent design at all. I like Bleedstorm as arms, I really do, but for Fury, no thanks. This is a talent setup I would run for dungeons and raiding. In raids I could see using Frenzy in single target encounters, it depends. For leveling and soloing, I would definitely run Bounding Stride instead of Warpaint. All of these talents are still in a state of change, and I'm sure the ideal talents will be a little different, at the very least, once BFA goes live. This next part of the video, just like it is in every other video, is extra special super duper subject to change. It's Azerite traits. Fury has 6 Azerite traits on the beta so far, and while some of them aren't quite up to date with the overall class changes, there are still some neat bonuses too. Anyhow, let's go. First up is Blood Craze, which grants crit chance to Bloodthirst, stacking every second up to 10 times and resetting when you get a Bloodthirst crit. It's a bit outdated, but Bloodthirst crits still do extra damage, so that's something. Infinite Fury's up next. It grants you crit chance when Recklessness expires and is refreshed by your auto attacks. This trait is fine. There isn't any interaction between your abilities and crits anymore, so it's just extra damage. Nothing special. Pulverizing Blows causes Raging Blow to grant extra damage to each hit of your next rampage, and stacks up to 5 times. This is an interesting bonus that seems like it would favor talent setups using Carnage a bit more than Frothing Berserker. Reckless Fury is another small passive damage increase, but it also provides cooldown reduction to your primary offensive cooldown, and that really captures the essence of Fury from Legion in a nice way. I like it. Simmering Rage is similar to Pulverizing Blows, but it causes your rampage to grant you 5 rage over its duration. This talent favors Carnage as well. It's interesting, but a little bit redundant. Trample the Weak is the last Azerite trait for Warrior, and a really great ability name. It's also probably the least interesting of the 3 Rampage traits, but it's the only one that definitely favors Frothing Berserker instead of Carnage. In normal group DPS situations, you're going to probably have about 100% health when you're DPSing, and since you're dealing damage to your enemy, they will not. That means the effect will trigger most of the time when you're DPSing, and since it's a pure stat bonus, it's going to interact pretty nicely with Frothing Berserker's damage and haste buff. Overall, the Azerite traits for Fury could definitely use a little more variety, but I like some of the ideas they're shooting for. I would like to see them ease back off of all the different Rampage buffs and give us some more fun interactions with Whirlwind or Enrage or Raging Blow. So now for the 2 most important questions. Is Fury Warrior still fun, and is it still good? Yes, yes, yes. Very much yes. For years. Fury Warrior has gone from being a super fast, super fun class that feels explosive and dynamic at the end of each expansion, and turned into a potato at the beginning of the next expansion. Blizzard has finally figured out how to make Fury Warriors step out of the past and into the future. I expect that for once, Finally, Fury Warrior will feel fun, dynamic, and fast-paced, even at the beginning of BFA. And that's awesome. Well, I think that about covers it. If you have any questions about Fury Warrior, ask away. You can also head over to the Warrior Discord and look in the BFA Fury channel for some good discussions and some helpful pinned posts. Many thanks go out to Arkimteres for his great work on DPS Warriors. He helped me rediscover my love for DPS Warriors during Legion, and he's been a really helpful source of information and feedback for the DPS Warrior community during the BFA beta. I will be covering other beta updates and putting together more tank-related, and sometimes not-so-tank-related videos soon. So stay tuned for more great BFA beta content, and as always, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Bye!